Welcome, ladies. Today we are experiencing our very first webinar, which we're very excited about, and I'm pleased to get to offer this webinar topic, Boundaries and Self-Care. It's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. It's one of the first things I had to learn when I entered recovery. I had never learned this before. I grew up in a family that didn't have boundaries, a family that didn't allow for self-care. Everything was, if you were wanting time for yourself, that was selfish. I was not even allowed, excuse me, to have time alone in the bathroom without being interrupted. There were no locks on our doors. Parents would just walk right in regardless of the time of day or whatever. So boundaries was something very new to me. I also grew up in a church setting where you couldn't say no. If you were asked to do something, you were expected to do it, whether it was your gifting, whether it was something you enjoyed or not. You were expected to say yes. And then you would actually in many ways be punished for saying yes. It was a very odd environment. So when I realized that my husband wasn't going to change, I knew I had to learn some new things. And one of the very first lessons I learned was setting boundaries. So with that, let's get started. What are boundaries? Before we can really start learning how to set them, we need to learn what they are and what they aren't. Boundaries can be defined as what I can and cannot live with. We can also define them as what is our responsibility and what is not. By setting healthy boundaries, we take responsibility for ourselves and our choices and allow other people to take responsibility for themselves and their choices. A lot of organizations, unfortunately, as good as 12-step is, and I don't want to say anything too negative about it at all, but one of the downsides of the traditional 12-step process is they sometimes look at our setting boundaries with our addict spouse as a sign of codependency. They are not codependent. A definition of codependency is taking responsibility for the behavior, actions, or choices of another. By setting boundaries, we're taking responsibility for our own selves and setting an expectation for others to take responsibility for themselves and their choices and actions. A very important aspect of boundaries is that they need to be time-specific. Open-ended boundaries just don't work for an addict because the typical addict will put things off as long as possible. As long as there's no discomfort, they're going to keep doing what they're doing. When I initially set the first boundary with my husband, even before I learned anything about boundaries, I was blessed to have the insight to make it time specific. The last time where I put my foot down, finally, I had discovered some emails coming into his account from a pornographic website that sent porn into an email account that he didn't realize I knew about. I called him at work and basically said, you have until the end of this week to talk to the recovery pastor at our church and to start going to the men's group. I knew they had a men's group for sex addicts, and we had a dedicated recovery pastor, and that was rare, especially 12 years ago. But at least I knew to make that time specific because I'd asked him to get help many times during the first 6 years of our marriage, time after time after time. Every time I caught him, I said, why am I the only one in counseling? And he would agree to get help, but since I didn't put a time limit on it, he never followed through until I finally put a time limit on it and said enough is enough. If this isn't done by the end of this week, you need to find a new place to live. And that leads to the next point. We need to decide what will happen if our boundaries are not honored, and then follow through on them if they're not respected. And that's one of the hardest parts of boundaries. It really is tough to put a relationship on the line, and it's even more tough for those in the Christian community whose experience looks down on any possibility of separation. Obviously, that's something we want to avoid if possible, but when our husbands are not honoring our marriage vows, especially the vow of fidelity. I believe that that is listed in the Bible as an authentic reason for a separation or even a divorce. And it's an individual decision. We're not here to tell you that you have to divorce, you have to separate. My point is that we need to decide, if they choose not to honor the boundary, what we're going to do about it, and then have the courage to follow through on whatever that is. Here's some ideas for self-care. There's several of them here, and in a moment I'll turn the mics back on and let you share any items that are helpful to you as well. Got walking, biking, getting a massage, running, going to a movie with a friend or even by yourself. I do that from time to time. I'll just go to a movie by myself. I love just losing myself in a story, even if it's a bad story. I just lose myself in it and relax. Going on a retreat with your church or by yourself. I've been on several silent retreats just by myself, and I've got a favorite place here in Minnesota that I go, and it's called Potsdamer Terrace, and I've got the web address there. I also have included a web address for a retreat finding service, and they do silent retreats as well. Going to a support group is extremely important. Going back to school and honing skills for a new career. If you find you need to figure out an income source for yourself, this is a great way to start. Exercising and joining a health club. Singing, dancing, worship, doing a play with a local theater company, another personal favorite of mine. Hiking, karate, playing with clay or finger paints. That's a lot of fun, really. Taking a dog for a walk, stroking your dog or cat, and breathing exercises. One thing I've learned fairly recently is how important our breathing is. I didn't realize the extent of what it does for our body until recently. When we are in a stressful situation, and this certainly is a very stressful situation, we tend to, without even realizing it, start breathing very shallowly. We're not taking advantage of the full capacity of our lungs. That actually sends a signal to the brain that there's danger. There's a bear about to attack, and we need to get ready to either freeze, flee, or fight. I had no idea that just shallow breath could send that powerful a message to the brain. When we allow ourselves, and even in some cases make ourselves take deeper, more even breaths and slow it down, it actually sends a signal to the brain that we're okay. Even if it's chaotic around us, we can calm ourselves just by taking a few minutes to relax. And what I do is I sit back in a chair and I lean forward and just release my neck, and I take several very deep, slow breaths. In order to occupy my mind, I'll do one or two things. I'll either count 1 on the exhale and 2 on the inhale, or I will repeat the verse, "Be still and know," on the exhale, "that I am God," on the inhale, just in my mind, to give it something to do so I'm not continuing to think along the panic lines. Doing this for 5 or 10 minutes is a huge gift that you can give yourself in calming yourself down and taking care of you. All right, I'm going to turn the mics on, and I am going to allow you to talk about any ideas that you have for self-care. Jody is saying by chat that sometimes journaling helps her. That's an excellent, excellent idea. Often writing out our feelings helps us diffuse them and gives them a voice. I can give you an example of a few weeks ago. I was doing an exercise where I was to write down a lot of my traumas. And I expected to be very overwhelmed and depressed when I went back and looked at the list, and I wasn't actually. It was very validating. So sometimes writing out our pain and giving it that voice gives us the validation we so desperately need, as well as a way to get it out and release it from holding on to it inside. Excellent suggestion, Jody. Marsha, how about you? Doing something that also increases your joy. Like what, Marsha? Nature, definitely. Anything, and Marsha's right, anything that also gives us joy is also good self-care. Walking in nature, roller skating or rollerblading through nature, whatever gives you the most joy and increases that joy factor. Joy is an extremely important part of our journey. and it feels like we'll never find it again, but we can. And self-care is one of the ways we can do that. I know doing theater and singing for me is a huge source of joy. And when I go too long without doing those things, I can feel myself slipping. Another thing Marsha mentions is connecting with people, even for 5 minutes, and that's also very important. A journey like this we're on with a sex addict really can isolate us. We feel so much shame because of what they've chosen to do that our instinct is to get into our cocoon and just hide. And sometimes that's an important thing for us to do. However, connecting with other people, even for a short time, is an extremely, extremely important part of self-care. Doesn't mean we have to talk about what's going on. In fact, sometimes we need to talk to people about something other than what's going on. Just to have those connections and laugh together and smile at another person and get their smile in return is a huge, huge part of what we can do for ourselves in taking care of ourselves. Great suggestions, Marsha. Any others that either of you have? Music. I'm with you on that one, Jody. Listening to music is a huge part of my self-care. And I will admit, I have a penchant for really depressing songs. And I think part of the reason for that is because then I know that somebody else has felt that way too. And so it's validating. So I do give myself that opportunity to have my little private pity party with some depressing songs. And then I try to switch it out to more uplifting things. So yes, definitely music is huge, and worship music in particular. Focusing ourselves on God for a bit and as much as possible can really be a huge part of self-care, because He always answers. He always returns the favor. Jody types, and that's why they call it the blues. Exactly. All right, let's move on to some questions. And I've had some questions submitted ahead of time that I would like to refer to. Let me bring those up. There we go. The first question submitted was, I don't understand. My pastor tells me I'm supposed to submit. How can I draw boundaries with my husband around his addiction and be a submissive wife at the same time? Oh, that is such a hard question. It's a tough one. In an ideal relationship, and I'm reading this because I took some time to prepare answers to these since they were submitted ahead of time. In an ideal relationship, as the example given of Christ and His church, this holds true. I'm talking about Ephesians 5, where it talks about women needing to be submissive to their husbands, and it says to their own husbands. I think there's definitely a specific meaning there. However, when our husbands are involved with sexual immorality, we are told in the same chapter of Ephesians, therefore do not be partners with them, and that's found in verse 7. The next question submitted is, how do I draw a boundary in a way that won't make him defensive and won't make me sound like his mother? I want him to just understand how much it hurts me when he stares at young sexy teens and women. I feel like he's undressing them with his eyes. I know how that feels. It's hard. As far as setting boundaries, on the one hand, we cannot control how another person will react to our boundary. An addict will look at anything that gets in the way of their high as controlling, no matter how well put. But there are ways we can keep our side of the street clear and appropriate by using I statements. Something like this: because I feel hurt and betrayed when you look at other women, I need you to learn to look away when you find yourself fixated. I need to see you take no long or second looks. Doing so approaches the issue from a place of vulnerability, from our feelings and how they can help us, rather than making demands. Even if they see it as controlling, we can say we are coming from a place of feeling, not ordering. The next question. I've drawn boundaries and the porn has to go, but he just switched from the computer to downloading it to his phone when he's away from the house. It feels hopeless. Unfortunately, there is nothing we can do to make an addict stop, and that means that many will cut off one area only to increase in another. All we can do is take care of us, decide what we can and cannot live with, and what we need to do if our boundaries are not honored. And it's tough. It's very, very hard. Also, what I've found is an addict will do only as much as they're asked. So sometimes if we just say, I won't allow porn in my home anymore, they take that to mean that outside of the home, as long as I don't bring it in the house, it's okay. They will pick and choose their own definitions. And I found that to be true with my own husband. We had to sit down and define what I meant by acting out in order to make it as clear as day for him. That was an important thing because there were one or two things that I didn't specify in our original agreement that kind of slipped through the cracks. And so we had to revisit our boundaries from time to time, both to strengthen the boundaries that needed strengthening, and then because we've been in the process for so long, and he's actually been sexually sober for 8.5 years now, to eliminate boundaries that were no longer necessary. So that's an important part of boundaries as well, is they need to be revisited and honed and tuned. That's something that we need to decide to do, whether they want to participate in it or not. We need to, like I said, decide what we can and cannot live with, and then decide what we're going to do if that boundary is not honored. All right. Can you give us some examples of your boundaries with your husband about his addiction to help me know what is fair to ask for? Also, if you can share how he responds, again, help me know what normal for an addict is in recovery. Absolutely. We have several boundaries that even this long into recovery are still in place. One boundary is that if my husband were to have a slip, which means any acting out, he is required to tell his accountability partner within the first 24 hours, and then within 24 hours of that, tell me. Originally, the boundary was if he had a slip, he had to tell me immediately. We found that at a place where I could, when he explained what made it work better for him and what he needed, it made sense to me, so we compromised. And he explained to me that if he had the opportunity to talk with his accountability partner first, he was more likely to tell me. Number one, because he had the opportunity to talk with somebody about it who was not as emotionally involved. And two, by telling his accountability partner, one of the rules is if he doesn't tell me within 24 hours, his accountability partner will. So it gives him the pressure to follow through with telling me. That was something I could compromise on, so we agreed to the 24-24 rule, as I call it. Another example is we agreed that laptops, phones, reading material may not be taken into the bathroom. That was one of his prime places of acting out. We have reduced that significantly over the years. At this point, no electronic devices are allowed, but he can take a book in with him. He's a big bathroom reader, but he shows it to me first so that I know that it's nothing inappropriate. The big one, if he were to return to the addiction, and by returning to the addiction, I mean any acting out that is not voluntarily reported, either to both to his accountability partner and to me. If I find something that he has not told me about, for example, he has to leave the home. And that may or may not include a divorce, or at the very least an official legal separation. I won't allow that in my home or in our marriage, in our life, regardless of whether it's in the walls of our home or not. I hope to never have to enact that boundary. I really hope not to. But even though my husband has been sexually sober 8.5 years, we've been in recovery for 12, he's a human being. And as a human being who is an addict, even though recovering, he cannot look at me in the eye and swear and mean that he will absolutely never, ever, ever act out again. It's impossible for him to do that as a human being. And therefore, as a human being, it would be foolish of me to trust him. So we still have that in place. The important thing to understand about appropriate boundaries is they're going to be different for everyone. You're going to have boundaries that aren't necessary for another couple. Some men aren't bathroom readers, so the rule about reading in the bathroom and taking stuff in isn't an issue. whereas for me it is. There are other boundaries that are more universal. The boundaries about acting out, defining what acting out is extremely important, and what you mean by it and where and all of that. Put it in writing if you have to. We did. We've got it written out, signed by both of us. Deciding what helps us heal is extremely important, and putting that into words. Sometimes they're not going to agree to them, and again, that's when we have to decide what we're going to do if that boundary is not heeded. All right, on to the last question submitted. Sometimes I feel like I need to draw boundaries with myself about where I can and cannot go during my healing, because some of the places I used to go trigger me now. Last summer I loved to go to the pool in our apartment complex, but now I get triggered by the other women and the teenage girls there. And the mall makes me feel like I can't breathe. I know exactly what you're feeling there. I've been there. It's so frustrating to go somewhere expecting to be able to relax and have a break, only to get triggered and feel overwhelmed by pain. Sometimes we have to decide not to go to a specific place, at least for a while, and find new places to go to relax. We can also learn to talk ourselves through the triggers and restore the sense of calm and enjoyment whenever possible. An example is there was a bed and breakfast that my husband and I have been to several times. And the last time we went there, it was for his birthday, and I'd arranged a couples massage. He was finished up before I was, and was out in the lobby waiting, and he was talking with the receptionist. I found out a few days later that he had fixated on this woman and used her as an object of fantasy to act out, masturbating. And I have not been able to go back to that bed and breakfast. And it's sad because that was a very special place for us. I just haven't had any desire to go back because it just triggers me. We've had to find other places to go. I have not scheduled any more couples massages. That's off the table at this point. You know, like I said, we've had to find new places, and so far it's been hard to find a place that really matches the feeling of that place, but it's okay. We've found places to go where we really enjoy each other's company and just can relax and let down, and they're not as connected to that memory. For a long time, like I said before, I couldn't do theater, which is a huge passion of mine, and it was like going for 6 years with my arm cut off to not do that for so long. When I finally auditioned for a play again, it was tough, and when I got cast, it was very hard to go to rehearsal the first week or so, and I had to do things to talk myself through that I was going to be okay and that he was responsible for any choices he made. So there are things that we can do to learn to talk ourselves through and restore that enjoyment in some areas. But realistically, sometimes we find we need to let go of some things as well. All right, I'm going to open it up for any other questions besides these that have been pre-submitted. Marsha writes, gosh, it sounds like boundaries can cause us losses. Unfortunately, yeah, they can. And this whole journey causes loss for us. We are experiencing a loss as profound as a death. In fact, I've had many women comment, you know, it would be so much easier if he had died. And we can often feel that way. But the good news is that we can look at it also as the opportunity to expand our horizons and find new things that we enjoy and stretch our boundaries a little bit, stretch beyond what is familiar. And it's scary, but I've learned new things about myself through this journey and what I'm capable of. Learning to stand up and say no was something that was very important for my husband to see in me, as was self-care. A really funny example of learning to take care of myself is it was the first winter after we got into recovery. And living in Minnesota, we can get anywhere from 2 inches of snow in a winter to a lot, a lot more. And it happened to be a pretty snowy winter. And one day I looked outside and there was probably about 1.5 feet of snow in the driveway. And I said, oh dear. And I didn't know how to use the snowblower, and I knew I would never survive shoveling it. And the kids were too small at the time to help. And I decided I was going to go out and learn to use the snowblower. And I managed to get it started, and I plowed that driveway. It took 1.5 hours, but I got it plowed. My husband got home from work to a clear driveway, and he came in and he asked, oh, did George across the street plow the driveway for you? And I said, nope. Oh, did Luke do it? Nope. I did it myself. And he got really quiet. And it wasn't until a couple of days later he came to me and he said, you know, you teaching yourself to use the snowblower and doing that scared me. And I was kind of surprised by that. I didn't understand why it would scare him. And then he went on to explain, because I realized that you can make it without me. You don't need me as much as I thought you did. You're not dependent on me. You're stronger than I thought you were, and more determined than I thought you were. It was then that he really started seeing things from my perspective and how what he had done had hurt me, and recognizing that I wasn't going to crawl into a hole and roll over and let him do whatever. That if he wanted me in his life, that things had to change, because he finally saw that I was capable of life on my own. And all it was plowing the driveway. It wasn't anything major. All right, anything else at all? Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to hearing from you. I did mention that I would say more about the support groups that we run, and I'm going to turn on screen sharing a moment so that I can show you where they are found on our website. I'm going to go over to our website, Journey to Healing and Joy, and I'm going to back up to the front page. To find the groups, you can click on Talk with Someone, Group Support, and I'm going to bring up the support group schedule. All right. We have a number of groups available, and I'm also going to be offering a Boundaries Intensive group, and I'll get that posted soon as I look at my calendar and decide on the day. The first group that we recommend, if you haven't gone through it already, is called Journey to Healing and Joy, and that's based on Marsha's workbook of the same name. And I've got a couple of those coming up. To register, simply click on the registration button. Each group is limited to 4 women. We go with a minimum of 3. Feel free to register, and you have the option to pay either in 1 lump sum or 3 monthly installments. And if there's anything you need to break it down further or whatever, we can manage that, and just contact me, and I will be happy to help get you set up and started. The materials for that group are the workbook, Journey to Healing and Joy, and then Marsha is co-author of a wonderful book called Your Sexually Addicted Spouse, How Partners Can Cope and Heal. I would really love to work with you at any time. And if these times don't work for you, let me know a couple of days and times that do, and I will work to get a group set for you, or you're more than welcome to take a look at groups from our other coaches. My hours are usually daytimes, Monday through Thursday, and then I also do Saturday groups. So since I'm not available in the evenings on weekdays for self-care and taking care of my family, I do offer Saturday groups, and I usually do one at 11 a.m. Central and then one at 1 p.m. Central. And with that, I want to thank you once again for joining us. We will announce some more webinars soon. You can reach me by email at christy@acircleofjoy.com, and I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you so much for joining today.